Before we begin, you need to understand something. What you're about to hear is not fiction. It is not a movie script, and it is definitely not a campfire story. Every event, every detail happened in real life. Documented, investigated, witnessed by people who still refuse to talk about it today. Some say the truth was too disturbing. Others believe it was intentionally buried to protect the public. But tonight, you will hear it exactly as it unfolded. This is one of the most unsettling, real encounters ever recorded. And once you hear it, you will never forget it. In the late summer of 1977, a modest council house stood at 284 Green Street, Enfield, London. It was home to a single mother, Peggy Hodgson, and her 4 children. Among them were her daughters, Janet, age 11, and Margaret, age 13. On a night in August, something changed forever. It began slowly. A soft noise. A knock. Faint, almost dismissible. But to Janet and her siblings, it was real. The bed seemed to shake. When their mother came to check, they were frightened, wide-eyed, certain they had heard more than a creak. What followed was no simple imagination. On the very next night, a large chest of drawers slid across the floor. On its own, the girls had not touched it. Their mother tried to push it back, but it resisted, as if held by an unseen force. That moment shattered any calm the house had left. Over the following days, the strange events multiplied. Soft knocks echoed through the walls. Echoing footsteps were heard when no one walked. Toys, marbles, and small building bricks, things a child might drop, began flying through rooms without warning. Witnesses later claimed these objects shot through the air at high speed, as though expelled by some invisible power. Neighbors across the street, initially skeptical, were drawn in by the sounds. Some heard the knocking from outside. Others came in to check. The fear that had once belonged solely to the Hodgson family began spreading to people they didn't even know. The family, desperate and terrified, reached out to authorities. On the night of September 1st, 1977, police officers arrived to investigate. One policewoman, WPC Carolyn Heaps, claimed to have seen a chair slide across the living room floor. By itself, she described it as moving 3 to 4 feet, with no human nearby. She later reported that she could not find any logical explanation for the movement. That report, written officially, turned the event from a family's fear into a documentable incident. As the events kept escalating, household objects began to act as if they had minds of their own. Chairs toppled over. Drawers opened and closed by themselves. Windows rattled. The front door chime swung by itself. Strange bumps echoed through empty rooms when nobody was there. At times, the house felt alive and deeply hostile. Attempts to bring calm failed. Clergymen who blessed the house claimed their efforts had no effect. Local officials and curious onlookers came and left, often shaking their heads, unable to offer help or explanation. With each passing night, the household's sleep was stolen, replaced by dread. For the Hodgson children, their home had become unpredictable, dangerous, terrifying. And yet, even as fear spread, so did curiosity. The strange noises, the moving furniture, the flying toys. They began to draw attention beyond Enfield. What started as a frightened family's call for help was turning into one of the most debated disturbances of modern paranormal history. From a quiet house on a quiet street to a center of chaos, the stage was set. No one yet knew how far this would go. But one thing was clear: the world had to watch. By early September 1977, the events at 284 Green Street had become impossible to ignore. The police had already reported strange occurrences. Neighbors were talking. Even passers-by had begun noticing strange sounds coming from the house. And, inevitably, the media started to arrive. The story of the Hodgson family was spreading far beyond the quiet street in Enfield. It was at this point that 2 investigators from the Society for Psychical Research stepped in. Maurice Grosse, a physicist with years of experience in investigating paranormal phenomena, and Lyon Playfair, a researcher and writer, arrived at the house to observe and record the disturbances. They had been warned that the events might be exaggerated or even staged. Yet, from their first night, they realized there was more happening than anyone could easily explain. Objects moved when no one was near them. Drawers slid across floors. Chairs tipped over, sometimes without making a sound. Knocks and thumps echoed through walls, ceilings, and floors in patterns that seemed deliberate. The investigators were meticulous. Every event was logged. Every sound was noted. Every object in motion was photographed or recorded. Night after night, they watched, listened, and waited for the next occurrence. One evening, they recorded a chair sliding across the floor of the living room. No one was in the room at the time. Grosse described a cold, uneasy feeling that ran through him, as if the house itself were aware of their presence. Playfair noted that the chair's movement was clearly audible on the tape recorder, leaving no doubt that something had occurred. They were witnessing events that defied easy explanation, and yet, these were not stage performances. The investigators had the experience and tools to recognize trickery, and much of what they observed could not be faked easily. The investigators quickly noticed that Janet Hodgson was at the center of the activity. It was often around her that objects moved and strange noises occurred. On several occasions, voices were heard speaking through her. These voices were deep, guttural, and adult, sometimes claiming to be a former tenant of the house named Bill, who had died decades earlier. The investigators were careful to observe without influencing her, yet even with their precautions, the phenomena persisted. They recorded these voices on tape, capturing a chilling element of the events that no one could immediately explain. As word spread, journalists, photographers, and curious onlookers began arriving at the house. Crowds gathered outside, pressing to see what was happening. Some neighbors tried to witness events from their windows. Some police officers returned to monitor. Yet, even with all this attention, the activity continued inside. Objects moved, lights flickered, and strange knocks continued. The investigators noted that some events seemed more intense when people were watching, but many occurred when rooms were empty. The house seemed unpredictable, almost alive, as if it were responding to the presence of observers. Grosse and Playfair spent months at the house, often staying all night to ensure no movement was missed. They recorded hundreds of incidents, creating a meticulous log that included audio recordings, photographs, and written notes. They noted when furniture moved, when lights flickered, when voices were heard, and when objects flew across rooms. Their work was careful and precise, meant to document everything that happened without assuming a cause. Even with their careful observations, the investigators admitted they could not explain all the events. Some incidents defied logic entirely. Chairs tipped without human contact. Drawers opened and closed. Toys and small objects were thrown across rooms, sometimes with remarkable force. The sounds of knocks and thuds echoed in patterns that seemed intentional. Occasionally, Janet appeared to levitate, though these moments were brief and difficult to capture. The media coverage intensified. Newspapers printed stories of the disturbances. Photographers tried to capture moving furniture on camera. Television crews attempted interviews. The family's ordeal became a public spectacle. Yet, despite all this, many events remained unexplained. The investigators emphasized that while some of the children's behavior might have been exaggerated for attention, the majority of what they documented could not be explained away easily. By the end of the first few weeks, it was clear that this was no ordinary haunting. The house at 284 Green Street had become a center of mystery, attracting investigators, journalists, neighbors, and police alike. The Hodgson family remained at the heart of the story, living through nights of fear, exhaustion, and confusion. The stage was set for even stranger events to come. The world was watching, and the question lingered: what was truly happening inside this house? As the weeks passed, it became clear that Janet Hodgson, the 11-year-old daughter, was at the center of the disturbances. Many of the objects that moved, the strange noises, and the unexplained phenomena seemed to happen when she was present. The investigators, Maurice Grosse and Lyon Playfair, observed her closely, documenting every incident. One of the most unsettling aspects was the voices. Janet began speaking in a deep, guttural voice, very unlike her own. The voice claimed to be a man named Bill, who had allegedly lived in the house decades earlier. He spoke of events, memories, and even minor details about the home that the family had not known. At times, the voice seemed aware of the investigators, answering questions, and even responding to challenges. Audio recordings captured the chilling sounds. Listeners could hear the differences clearly: Janet's normal voice and the deep, adult tones that seemed to come from nowhere. Levitation was another phenomenon that shocked everyone. Several witnesses reported seeing Janet lifted off her bed during sleep. Sometimes she floated a few inches. Other times, it seemed higher. Investigators were present during some of these incidents, attempting to verify what they saw. While brief and difficult to capture fully, the levitations were consistent with other strange occurrences in the house. Objects flew through rooms, often in the same moments Janet was present. Marbles, toys, and even heavier items like bricks were reportedly hurled through the air. Witnesses described their fear as overwhelming, as the events seemed unpredictable and dangerous. The investigators were careful to rule out trickery. They watched Janet for long periods. They set up cameras, recorded audio, and monitored her actions. In some instances, she admitted to moving objects or exaggerating noises. But the majority of the events could not be explained by human intervention. Something beyond ordinary experience was occurring. Neighbors and police officers also witnessed strange events linked to Janet. Police claimed to hear knocks, see objects move, and hear the deep voices, even when no one else was in the room. Journalists tried to catch phenomena on camera, but much of the activity remained elusive, appearing only when witnesses were focused and attentive. The investigators also noted patterns. Activity often intensified at night. Certain rooms were more active than others. Janet's mood sometimes seemed to correlate with the severity of disturbances. Yet, there was no clear explanation for why this particular child became the focal point. Over time, the house itself seemed almost aware of the attention. Doors slammed, drawers opened, and furniture moved in ways that defied logic. Even the investigators, seasoned and skeptical, admitted they were unnerved by what they saw. The story of Janet and the strange voices drew national attention. Newspapers, television crews, and curious neighbors flocked to the house. Every incident became part of a growing archive of evidence. Yet, even with all the documentation, the true cause remained elusive. Janet, young and frightened, endured months of attention, fear, and confusion. Her life became intertwined with the mystery of the house. The floating objects, the deep voices, and the levitations left a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed them. By the end of this chapter in The Haunting, it was clear that the Enfield Poltergeist had escalated beyond ordinary mischief. It had become a phenomenon that challenged explanation, defied logic, and captivated the attention of experts, police, and the public alike. And still, even with all that had happened, the most intense and dramatic moments of The Haunting were yet to unfold. As the Enfield Poltergeist gained public attention, not everyone was convinced the events were supernatural. Skeptics, researchers, and some members of the media began examining the case with caution. They questioned whether the disturbances could be explained by human behavior or natural causes. Some believed the children, particularly Janet and Margaret, may have exaggerated events for attention. After all, they were living in a house suddenly at the center of public curiosity. On several occasions, Janet admitted to moving small objects or pretending certain events had occurred. Critics seized on this, claiming the haunting was largely a hoax. Yet, the investigators, Maurice Grosse and Lyon Playfair, noted that much of the activity could not be faked. Furniture moved when no one was near it. Deep, guttural voices appeared on recordings even when witnesses claimed the children were not speaking. Audio tapes captured noises and voices that could not be reproduced naturally. Objects flew across rooms, sometimes with speed and force, and sometimes in patterns that suggested intelligence behind the movement. Professional skeptics also explored natural explanations. Some suggested the noises were caused by the house settling, pipes expanding, or even the wind. Others proposed psychological explanations, claiming the family's fear and stress could have amplified minor events into something seemingly extraordinary. They argued that collective anxiety might have caused them to perceive normal occurrences as paranormal. Even magicians and illusion experts examined the case. They tested whether ventriloquism or sleight of hand could replicate the deep voices or moving objects. In some instances, they found minor incidents could be staged. However, the majority of events were difficult to reproduce convincingly. The investigators had been meticulous, often recording events with multiple witnesses and using long observation periods, which made deception unlikely for many of the phenomena. Public opinion was divided. Some believed the family had created elaborate tricks. Others felt the evidence was compelling and unexplained. Media coverage reflected this split, alternating between sensational stories and critical examinations. Each new witness, whether neighbor, journalist, or police officer, added complexity to the case. Despite skepticism, the Hodgson family endured. They faced scrutiny, doubt, and disbelief, yet they consistently reported the same strange phenomena. Their experiences were corroborated by multiple witnesses and documented in photographs, audio tapes, and investigator logs. The combination of physical disturbances, unexplained voices, and credible eyewitness accounts made this one of the most studied paranormal cases in history. Maurice Grosse and Lyon Playfair continued their work, carefully separating moments that could have been staged from those that defied ordinary explanation. They acknowledged the children sometimes faked small incidents. Yet, they emphasized that the majority of events were genuine, unexplained, and highly unusual. By 1979, the intense activity at 284 Green Street had begun to subside. Nights that were once filled with knocks, flying objects, and strange voices became quieter. The family, exhausted and fearful, started to regain some sense of normalcy. Janet Hodgson, the young girl at the center of the disturbances, eventually grew older, and many of the phenomena reportedly decreased in frequency and intensity. The household returned to a state closer to ordinary life, though the memories of those frightening nights remained vivid. The investigators, Maurice Grosse and Lyon Playfair, continued to document and analyze their findings. They wrote books, gave interviews, and presented audio recordings, photographs, and detailed notes. Their work preserved one of the most extensively documented paranormal cases in modern history. During this period, famed paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren also examined the case. While their involvement was limited compared to the Society for Psychical Research, the Warrens' endorsement brought additional attention to the story. They described the events as one of the strongest examples of poltergeist activity they had ever studied, though many skeptics questioned the extent of their claims. Public reaction to the Enfield Poltergeist remained divided. Some saw the case as undeniable proof of supernatural activity. Others dismissed it as exaggeration, misperception, or a hoax. Despite differing opinions, the story captured the imagination of the world, inspiring books, documentaries, and films. The Hodgson family's experience left lasting emotional and psychological effects. Years later, Janet and her siblings spoke about the fear, confusion, and media attention they endured. The events at 284 Green Street shaped not only their childhoods, but also the way paranormal investigations were perceived and conducted. Today, the Enfield Poltergeist is remembered as one of the most controversial and compelling paranormal cases ever recorded. Its legacy lives on in the audio tapes, photographs, and written accounts collected by investigators. Researchers continue to study the case, seeking to understand whether the events were supernatural, psychological, or a mixture of both. The story of the Enfield Poltergeist is more than just a haunting. It is a story of fear, courage, and the unknown. It reminds us how fragile our understanding of reality can be, and it challenges us to confront questions that remain unanswered even decades later. Even now, more than 40 years later, the house at 284 Green Street stands as a symbol of mystery, a place where ordinary life collided with something extraordinary. And though the activity has long since ceased, the story continues to captivate, frighten, and intrigue all who hear it. The Enfield Poltergeist remains an enduring reminder that some mysteries refuse to be explained, and that sometimes the truth is far stranger than fiction. The story of the Enfield Poltergeist leaves more questions than answers. A quiet house, a frightened family, strange knocks, flying objects, deep, unexplainable voices, and a young girl at the center of it all. Experts investigated, skeptics doubted, neighbors watched, and the world listened. Even after decades, the case remains one of the most debated and compelling paranormal events in history. What really happened at 284 Green Street? Was it a haunting? Or was there another explanation? We may never know. But the fear, the mystery, and the evidence continue to captivate anyone who dares to look closer. If this story chilled you or left you with questions, there is much more to explore. Subscribe now and hit the bell so you never miss the next true-life paranormal mystery. And remember, some stories are stranger than fiction, and some mysteries never truly end.